Good evening, everyone. I was going to continue on with my usual creepy stories compilation from Japan this week, as I just did a two-part special series. But last week, after a year and a half since I started this channel, I finally hit 1,000 subscribers. And so I just had to bring you another special episode to celebrate the achievement of this huge milestone. I've said this in the past, but I want to thank all of you who have been following me from the very beginning, and those of you who are new to this channel too. The past few months have especially been tough because I'd initially given myself a year to get to 1,000 subscribers, but I couldn't bring myself to quit because of all the lovely comments I would receive each time I uploaded a video, and getting some tips through Ko-fi.com also really boosted my motivation to keep going. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I'll definitely keep this channel going, and hopefully you guys will follow along with me as we navigate the creepy side of Japan. So, enough from me. Let's get started on today's special episode. I once wrote a story called Hotel on a Mountain in a book called Ghost Property Guide 2. In a certain region, there's a hotel on top of a mountain, and there were two buildings, one of which was shut down and abandoned in 1990. The reason for the closure is unknown, but according to a woman who used to work there part-time, let's call her Maiko, strange phenomena occurred quite frequently. I covered all of this in my previous book, but when I went to the actual site sometime later, I learned something new. The new building was built on the edge of a mountainous cliff. From there, as you walk down a gravel road that leads deeper into the mountain, you come across the abandoned half of the hotel. Those who have read my previous book will already know about the incidents that occurred here, but some of you may be new, so let's begin by recounting Maiko's experiences when she worked there. This happened about 20 years ago. When Maiko was put in charge of front desk relations in the hotel's new building, she noticed a picture of a waterfall she'd never seen before in an old tourist pamphlet for the hotel. She asked her co-workers where the waterfall was located, but was told, "You can't access that waterfall anymore, but it's near the old building that closed down." Deeper in the mountains, there's an older building that used to be part of the hotel that had closed down, and for some reason, its existence is kept secret from tourists. None of the other hotel employees talked about it much, and treating it as if it were haunted and dangerous. So one day, Maiko rounded up some of her co-workers and decided to go check the old building out. They walked along a gravel road, and not long after, came across the waterfall pictured in the pamphlet. And close to it was the abandoned building. After taking a few pictures of the waterfall, they headed over to the building and went in. What they saw was eerie to say the least. There were ofudas plastered all over the place. In Shinto and Buddhism in Japan, an ofuda is a talisman made out of various materials such as paper, wood, cloth, or metal. Certain kinds of ofuda are intended for a specific purpose, such as protection against calamity or misfortune, safety within the home, or even to find love. They may be kept on one's person or placed on other areas of the home, such as gates, doorways, kitchens, or ceilings. With this channel and the types of stories that I share, ofudas are usually used to keep something evil trapped inside a room or a building, etc. So, Maiko looked closely at one of them and saw a picture of a coiled snake and something like a spell written on it, but she couldn't read every word of it. Her and her colleagues tore some off the wall, explored a bit more, and headed back after they had their fun. The next day, new guests checked into the hotel. It was a mother and her daughter who looked to be about 4 years old. She had braces. Maiko led the pair down the aisle to their room, all the while talking to them about the various tourist spots around the area. Time and time again, she would hear the little girl ask her mother why there were two of us showing them the way to their room. She was tugging on her mother's arm and kept asking, "Why, Mummy? Why? Why are there two of them?" After a while, the mother clearly got annoyed and suddenly yelled at her to stop and smacked her head hard. No one saw it coming. It was such a severe reaction that Maiko suddenly felt quite uneasy and thought the mother was a psycho. When Maiko got back to the front desk after helping the pair get settled in the room, she told her co-workers about what just happened. They all tilted their heads and said to her in a puzzled tone, "What guests? We haven't had any new guests check in." She had obviously just spoken to the two and taken them to their room, so Maiko couldn't understand what they were all saying. She described the mother-daughter duo to them in great detail, but no one on the floor had seen anyone like that arriving at the hotel. Needing to clear things up, she headed to the room in question and knocked on the door. A completely different family answered. But that wasn't the end of it. The next day there was a new booking, so Maiko and her colleagues lined up in front of the elevator to welcome the guests when they arrived. No one could hide their surprise when a mother and her daughter stepped off the lifts. It was the pair that Maiko had seen the day before. The girl gave them a wide grin, her braces glinting in the light. Maiko had actually seen them the day before. Was it a hallucination? She had described them to her colleagues, so they all knew what they were looking at and they couldn't believe their eyes. A few days later, an elderly woman staying at the hotel collapsed in the onsen and passed away. A young male student who was working part-time got mild altitude sickness. He was told to go home, and as he was walking past a construction site, one of their tools fell from above, hitting him on the head and killing him instantly. After this, nothing else happened and Maiko safely finished her summer job at the hotel. A while later, she received a phone call from one of her co-workers, one that had gone to explore the waterfall and the abandoned hotel with her. She told Maiko that there was something strange in the picture of the waterfall. Apparently, there were numerous small faces dotting the surface of the flowing water. Not knowing what to do with the picture in question, the ones who were there that day all gathered at Maiko's house. That's when something hit her window. When she looked outside, she saw that it was the son of her childhood friend. Let's refer to him as Ren. He was picking up stones and throwing them at her window. She opened it and called out to him, "Hey Ren, what's wrong? Come here." But he never replied and eventually walked away. Thinking it strange, she closed the window when the phone rang. It was the mother of the boy she just saw, and she informed her that her son had run away from home. No one had any idea where he could be, and had Maiko seen him? Maiko stated that he was just standing outside her window, but when everything came to light, it was discovered that at the time the boy was standing outside her window, he was actually deep in the mountains in Saitama Prefecture, which means that what Maiko and her friends saw was his Ikiryo. Ikiryo are souls of still living people which have temporarily left their bodies and move about on their own. They appear just as the living person from which they spawn. Sometimes they take on a ghostly, translucent form, while other times they're indistinguishable from a living person. There are a number of common ways for Ikiryo to appear: during a near-death experience, fainting, intense passion or desire, intense hatred, or even as part of a curse. Ikiryo most commonly appear due to some intense emotional trauma, and the owner of the soul is almost always unaware of the Ikiryo's existence. This can lead to some very awkward situations and misunderstandings. I have an in-depth video about the Ikiryo which I've put a link in the description box and at the end of this video, so if you haven't seen it yet, feel free to check it out. So, the reason as to why Ren ran away was never made clear, as he had fallen and hit his head hard while he was in the mountains. He was taken to the hospital for treatment, but his death was confirmed not long after. A few days after that, Maiko took the picture from the waterfall to an old temple close by. She wanted some advice as to what she should do with it. Let me jump in here again really quickly. I'm curious to know what you guys do in your country when you happen to capture spirits or ghosts in a photograph. Because most of the population in Japan believe in the spiritual world, it's extremely common for us to take it to a temple or a psychic to ask them how we should get rid of them. We believe that if we've captured anything malevolent, that it should be disposed of properly to make sure that we're not adversely affected by them. If it's bad, the priests perform a kind of exorcism on the photograph and on those who were present at the time before burning it on their spiritual grounds. So, what do you guys do? Do you keep them? Just throw it away in the bin? Or do you do something similar to what we do in Japan? Please let me know in the comments below because I'm really curious. Now, let's get back to the story. The chief priest's face drained of color as soon as he looked at the photo, and he said, "There are only 2 people in Japan that can purify this. One is in Aomori and the other is in Kyushu. You must go to one of them right away." Considering Aomori was closer to her, Maiko first contacted the psychic there. Before she could finish explaining the situation, he cut her off, saying, "I can't help you. I'm too old." She then had no choice and contacted the psychic residing in Kyushu. He said, "Listen carefully and do exactly as I say. You need to come to me straight away, but under no circumstances should you board any other plane other than the one scheduled on the date and time that I specify. If you take any other plane, it will crash." Feeling like she'd suddenly been thrust into some occult movie, she did as she was told and safely landed in Kyushu. According to the psychic, she was possessed by shinigamis. The kanji character used literally translates to death god. In Japanese religion and culture, they've been described as monsters, helpers, and creatures of the darkness. Maiko underwent an exorcism and left the photograph in question with the man. After the ordeal, Maiko went back home with peace of mind, thinking that everything would be okay. However, she continued to experience strange phenomena, such as hearing people running up the stairs when she was home all alone and see dozens of legs hanging down from the ceiling. As of the writing of this book, she's moved into a new place, and that concludes her experience. I went into more details in my previous book, Ghost Property Guide 2, but I just wanted to give you a general overview this time. To sum it up, there is no denying that she began to have creepy experiences after she went into the abandoned hotel building. I asked her on numerous occasions to recount her experiences because I found it quite hard to believe, but her stories never wavered and she went into great detail each time. The day after she spoke candidly with me, apparently her rosary beads that she had always cherished literally burst into pieces right in front of her eyes. Not only that, the day before I was to meet her to get details about it, she broke her ribs and was hospitalized. The reason for her broken ribs? She was sitting alone in her room when her bookshelf began to shake out of nowhere and came crashing down on top of her, trapping her underneath. Neither Maiko nor myself could ignore all these signs. She decided she couldn't continue speaking about it, and I didn't push it any further either. Not long ago, I published this story in a magazine which piqued my interest again, and that's when I decided to actually go to the hotel myself. As I mentioned at the very beginning, the old abandoned hotel actually still stood there. It was sometime in the summer when I headed to the hotel on top of the mountain. As I drove up the road, the smell of sulfur hit my nose. There were signs all over the place saying no trespassing due to toxic gases being released. I finally reached the mountaintop at 5 in the morning. The mountainside off in the distance was dyed orange with the rising sun, and I parked the car and stepped outside. The smell of sulfur was gone, and I took a deep breath of fresh, clean air. The hotel was still in business, although there were no signs of anyone there. I headed towards the abandoned building and looked for the waterfall, the one where Maiko took a picture of the many faces floating in the water. But all I could see were large boulders and no water flowing anywhere. There had been a landslide some years back, and the topography was completely different to what it used to be. The building was in worse disrepair than I had anticipated. Construction tools and other items were scattered about as if there was an attempt to demolish the old hotel, but stopped midway, never completing it. Equipment was strewn around carelessly as if the workers had abandoned them and fled the scene. I walked in through the open entrance and looked around the first floor. I saw tags hanging that indicated room numbers. The floors were falling out, walls were beginning to crumble, and large pieces of glass were scattered over the stairs leading to the second floor. It was a very precarious situation with too many things that could injure you with if you weren't careful. I started climbing up the stairs, being careful of where I stepped. On the second floor, I began to walk down the hall when the floorboards gave way and I almost fell straight through. The wood was rotten for sure, but there's a chance that the construction was defective from the beginning. Maybe that's one reason why this part of the hotel got shut down. The second floor, just like the first, had guest rooms lining the hallway. According to Maiko, there were lots of offertas plastered everywhere, but I didn't see a single one. It's possible that the construction workers took them off before they started their work, but that can't be confirmed. I made a new discovery, however, something Maiko hadn't mentioned when she went exploring years ago. As I carefully made my way down the hall, I found an iron gate in one spot. It seemed completely out of place and unnatural. I pulled it open, and it led into a passage with stairs that led upwards. I went up and saw another even narrower passage leading into pitch darkness. This building only had 2 floors when looking at it from the outside, but there was actually another space above the ceiling. It was a hidden Japanese-style tatami room, and there was a damp futon full of mold spread out on the floor. I remembered Maiko telling me that there was a room somewhere in the old building where they kept the bodies of guests that had died while they were staying there. This room was probably what she was referring to. After looking at all the rooms, I left the building and toured around the surrounding areas. And that's when I realized something. This location on the mountain was a tourist destination, and it had formed an independent community with natural hot springs and a local industry. But for some reason, there weren't any graveyards, no crematoriums, no hospitals, not even a fire or a police station. You had to drive for hours to get to the next city in order to get to these facilities. If a guest got ill in this type of environment, they couldn't be taken to a hospital. Not quickly anyway, which would have dire consequences if it was an emergency. They wouldn't have even gotten first aid care for the same reasons, unless another guest or an employee were medical professionals or had some kind of medical training. So, I guess it made sense for the hotel to have a creepy room like that to keep dead bodies in there. But what then? While Maiko was still working, 2 elderly people passed away within a short period of time, but the police and the ambulance were never called. When I drove down the mountain a bit, I saw another hotel and I decided to ask them a few questions. The owner told me that the abandoned hotel used to be an old Japanese-style ryokan. After the owner passed away, another big hotel chain bought it and built a new hotel nearby, and the old ryokan became the current abandoned building. According to the man, a female college student went missing around the area. Her professor, who was there with her, went out looking for her, and he too disappeared. I asked whether they could have succumbed to the toxic gases, but all the man said on that matter was, "They just went missing," and refused to elaborate any further. There were little souvenir shops sprinkled around, so I went into each of them to try to get more details about the old building, but not many of them would speak up about it. They told me what I already knew, which was the fact that it used to be an old ryokan. The big hotel mogul that bought the building is a famous company which I cannot name, but let's refer to it as Company A, and they still own the property. I tried getting information on why they put offertas everywhere and why they didn't demolish it, but all I got was, "I don't know." I did, however, find out a bit more about the abandoned ryokan. It was a well-established place that ran for many decades, but a fire broke out about 40 years ago and destroyed everything. The cause is unknown. It was even reported in the newspaper, and while the guests were all safe, 2 employees suffered non-life-threatening burns. The same month the fire broke out, but 10 years later, 3 snowboarders fell ill from the toxic fumes. According to reports of that time, they were all found unconscious, but there's no follow-up report on what happened to them. Since there were no female university students among them, it's a different case from the missing persons case I just mentioned. But it appears that many accidents have occurred in this area due to the toxic gases being released. and there are cases that have been released in the media and those that haven't, so it's safe to assume that many accidents went unreported. If you look at back issues of travel magazines published in the 1980s and 1990s, the old abandoned building that used to be a ryokan was frequently introduced. After the fire, it was rebuilt and continued to operate under the same name. The fact that the new hotel was opened in 1990 under the name of Company A suggests that the takeover took place sometime in the 1980s. Looking at a local map published in 1991, the old building is referred to as the annex building of Company A's hotel. However, on the map published in 2007, there's just a blank space where the name should be. This means the old ryokan was shut down in the early 1990s. Although I was able to find the above information, it seems something more than just decreasing customers occurred that forced Company A to shut the old building down. There has to be a reason why they had to put ofuras all over the walls. This is something that would never happen today, with strict protocols having to be followed when building a hotel anywhere. But back in the day, the rules were probably a lot more relaxed. The ryokan was built in an area where toxic fumes were being released, and it was too late to go back when they realized it. They continued to operate regardless of numerous customers getting ill over the years by covering as much of it up as possible. And, as I explained earlier, the fact that this little mountainous village is so isolated from any healthcare facilities made it difficult for their guests to receive timely treatment. If it led to death because of that, the hidden room up in the attic of the building makes sense. They needed a place to stow the bodies away until they could get rid of them. With sulfur spewing out from various places in the mountain, it would be easy to dump and melt the bodies in them, making it extremely easy for those in the know to hide their tracks. If the locals kept their mouths shut, no one would ever find out. Come to think of it, a guest at an inn where I was having some coffee said something that stuck with me. He said, "All the hotels around here are run by the same family. They're all related." Well, that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? This mountain is still a hotspot for those who enjoy winter sports, and it becomes a lively and beautiful place when the snow falls. But there is a much darker, eerie background to this mountain that is unknown to most who visit. While other times they're indistinguishable.